I'm Jim Collison and live from Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Theme Thursday, Season 2, recorded on July 21st, 2016. Theme Thursday is a Gallup webcast series that dives deep into the CliftonStrengths Finder themes, one theme at a time, and today's theme is learner. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video window. So if you look right down there, there's a chat room that's down there. Right now, we can do it together.
Oh, that's really fun.
Really nice. And available for you, easy to log into. Look in the bottom left-hand corner of the chat room, and it'll say log in. Select that, and then choose the guest account. Put your own name in there and hit submit. Many of you are really good at that. I don't see too many guests out there. If you did come in as a guest, log out, log back in with your name so we know who you are. A great way of getting information or getting your questions, and we will try to take as many questions as we can today live during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version or you need custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, we do that as well. Contact us. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. There's also a contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your coaching resources and Strengths Finder training needs. And you can also catch the video on both download and streaming audio now available for you out on our coaches blog. It is at coaching.gallup.com. And Maika, I realize there's hundreds of hours of professional development out on our coaches blog. Many of you ask, and it doesn't even, you don't even have to be a coach, to be honest. Many of you talked to us this week about Theme Thursday, and there's almost 100 hours now. I think when we think about Theme Thursday, we are getting close. Well, we'll say 75 hours that are out there. And so go out to the coaches blog and get that stuff. Maika Leibbrandt is actually with me today here in the studios. If you're listening to the audio version, we may sound a little different. We may even talk a little bit different, but welcome to Theme Thursday.
Thanks. It's great to be here. And I say that every week, but it's really great to be literally here.
Yeah.
There's something totally awesome about being here at the riverfront in Omaha.
It's good to have you here. You're here because of the summit. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about the summit, but that just wrapped up. Good to have you in town. And you're like, hey, can we do it together? And I'm like, oh, we'll put a studio together.
And so he did. He resurrected a studio just because I wanted one.
A pop-up studio in an hour. So if you're listening, if you're used to a certain sound, sometimes when you listen to the same thing over and over again, you get kind of used to a certain sound. If you're used to that, and you're not hearing it, it's just because we're in a different place.
Don't worry. They'll kick me out, and we'll be back to our normal setup next week.
Actually off next week, and then we kick back in again for the rest of the themes until we get into October and kind of wrap it up for this year. And some exciting things about what's coming next year. We'll talk about that here in the end. All right, Maika, we're here today to talk about learner. Tons of people I met this week have learner. It's one of those, I think it's number one. I probably gave it away. But no, it's not, is it? No, it's not. But tons of folks I met this week here at the summit that have learner. Let's dig in a little bit. What is it?
Learner is, it's a thinking theme about people who just love the process of learning. It's an openness to mastering a lot of different things. And learner by itself doesn't intend to discern and to say, I only want to learn one thing, or I only am interested in this or that. It's this open sponge of being able to really dive into the process of learning. If you've got your companion guide there open for us, we've got the short definition at the very top. Here it is, right here.
We never show this. I never printed this out.
Well, I needed to learn a new software and failed to in time. So I actually wrote real notes with a pen.
Nice. Remember that pen and paper stuff?
I had no idea that they still existed. Right. Typically, I type into it as you can when you download the companion guide. But let's take a look. At the very top, we've got our short definition. People exceptionally talented in the learner theme have a great desire to learn and they want to continuously improve. The process of learning rather than the outcome excites them. What a beautiful piece to realize that it's about that joy of absorbing information and driving it toward a place where you can use that new information.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit later about the learner input, because those are very, very close. But a learner gets excited, I think, when we think about a woo getting excited to meet people or to be in a crowded space. A learner gets excited to be in a crowded learning space. And so as we think about conferences, or we think about, like we had the summit, or we think about going to college, or we think about high school, or we think about anything, right? Books, reading, podcasts. Many of you have gotten into podcasts, and you have found that as a learner, that satisfies that learning desire. Let's talk about the themes, power and edge.
So what's valuable about it? And again, when you're talking through with clients, perhaps where you want to take them is name it first and then claim it so that you can aim it or add some aspect of performance. Our power and edge is going to help you claim what's valuable about learner. People with the strong learner talents not only love to learn, but they're also intuitively, they know how they learn best. They can learn quickly, and when focused, they can keep a group, a team, or an organization on the cutting edge. I think that helps us understand some of the freshness that learner brings, because it's like having your eyes and your brain really opening to what's new, what's different, what don't I already know, and how can I engage and dance with the possibility of new mastery and new understanding.
Yeah, I always know a learner when they say, hey, I just read this. Right? Those folks that come to you all the time. Hey, have you read this most recent book? Have you seen this? Did you see this article on the internet? It would not surprise me today as I look at our chat room. We're going to get a lot of learners, right?
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, I think Theme Thursday is a perfect learning exercise, right? It would make a lot of sense. We got a lot of folks out there in the chat room today. It would make a lot of sense, a ton of sense, that learners would gravitate towards a program like this. And we got a lot of feedback this week on that. Just saying, I love the content. I love writing, but that's a learner in their best space.
Right.
So when we think about learner raw versus mature, it's a great section that we always talk about. What does that look like?
So the developmental journey for a learner, raw might mean no awareness around it, no investment into it. And sometimes that could get in the way. Raw learner, I think, is rampant. So I want to learn absolutely everything possible. The mature side of that is relevant. Understanding how can I learn something that's going to help me specifically or help others. Now, there's always going to be that openness of learner. There's that freshness and that curiosity. But I think in the raw form, it can be overwhelming almost. Like you could see all the potential that you could learn. I was going to try not to say a Pokemon reference, but gotta catch them all would be raw learner.
Yeah.
There's just so much, and it can feel like a big burden. Like you're never going to learn it all.
Yeah.
And that can sort of drive you crazy.
Maika, that Pokemon reference is going to be good for about 2 weeks.
I know,
and then no one will
totally
know.
Over.
Well, the Pokemon Go is what we're talking about. But with a learner, and when you think about in that raw state of rampant, almost at the price, learning can come at the price of relationships, right? In the sense that instead of spending time with people or spending time digging into people, it's digging into information or digging into whatever, right? It's that me. It's the consumption of me versus the we. You talk about relevant, learning those things that I need to learn to be able to pour into other people's lives. I think like Paul Allen, right? He has high input, but his learner is off the charts as well. And he learns not to keep it to himself, but to give it away, to give it to us. Oftentimes I'm the recipient of Paul's learner. As I talk to him, and he's got great ideas. He also has high ideation, so he just spills all over you. But it is one of those things when we think of that me versus we, that me keeps it, the we gives it away.
Right. But I think about that relevance as a great word for mature learner, because Paul could walk in and say, hey, Jim, you want to learn about playing the ukulele? And you might say, that's interesting. Or Paul could walk in and say, hey, Jim, I know you're paying attention to podcasting. I found out a new platform that you might want to learn about.
Right.
And that for him, I think it's an example of how do you give it away, but also that relevance of, am I building relationships by bringing a freshness that fits people?
Yeah, right on. What else? Raw versus mature.
A raw learner can be flighty because there's so much to learn. It can be a little bit difficult to really absorb things to a point of mastery. Learner loves that process. And sometimes you could get really tempted by the process of that first disequilibrium that happens when we learn things. Educationally, we grow by first feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And that could be so exciting for a learner, that instant aha. Whereas mature, I think, learner thinks about how do I get through that disequilibrium and into a place where I know enough that I can offer it to even to myself.
Yeah.
So if raw learner is flighty, then mature learner could be fresh. How do I really dive in and pay attention long enough so that I've mastered some piece of this new skill?
I also think learner is one of those themes that gets influenced pretty heavily. And I know they all do when we think about those influence, but I think learner is that driving force, but it can be influenced. But what else is in your top 5? And so you think of those, think of things like input or context or deliberative or even in a sense of activator or those action pieces that are doing. I think learner begins to take on the flavor of that. So no two learners, and we can say this about anything, right? But I think it's appropriate to say no two learners necessarily go about it in the same way because they're influenced by the context of the rest of their top 5, right?
Absolutely. What every learner will probably have in common is that perhaps openness to new information and to the absorption of new information in order to use it.
Yeah. Talk about that in the next set,
Sure.
Raw versus mature, because I think that ties right in.
So I think raw learner is open to all possibility. Mature learner is focused on mastery of what really matters. I was speaking with Rick Cook upstairs this morning, who is one of our learning and design consultants here at Gallup. Learner's his number 1. And I said, tell me what it looks like. I said, what is learner? And what is it in its best form? And what is it when it gets you in trouble? And he says, for me, if I'm not learning something new about every 2 or 3 years, I can feel that grind, like I'm at a plateau. I start to disengage. I start to get distracted more easily. And he's open to the fact that he can be really great at taking on a new idea and quickly becoming the master at it, and then helping it to serve other people. That only takes him, a little bit of information and some time spent absorbing that information to where he can feel like he's really a specialist. Yeah. Now, if he doesn't have that and he can't find some sort of a niche or some sort of a pathway for growth, that boredom can sort of bring something to stale.
Yeah.
And I coach a lot of learners who say, things were going great, but then I got to the top of my game and I didn't know if there's anything else I could learn. And all of a sudden I started to slide back in my performance, or I started to drive other people crazy, or I started to do things less well than I used to.
Yeah, get distracted, right? Yep. It can be a very, very distracting situation when a learner gets bored.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't feel like they're making progress moving forward. I want to try something new today since Mike and I have the chat room in front of us. And as we've described this learner to you, we'd love for you to describe it back to us. I know I see a lot of learners in here today, right? And so as we're going, if you would just describe maybe 1 or 2 sentences of how learner plays out for you. I think this will be great. One of those things you can only get live. We're not going to read.
It's going to be great.
We're not going to read every single one that's out there, but let's take a second and do that. Let's transition a little bit. Complementary themes. I'm most excited. I mentioned about as we put these combos together, but let's think about complementary themes.
And when we think about complementary themes, we think about them in the context of a partner. So what could another person with a different theme bring that would benefit learner, and what might they look like? The first one I thought of was futuristic. So if you're a learner, having a partner with futuristic, what they could help you do is think about what might be some of the specialties that we are going to need in the future. So if you're already open for discovering new pieces, for celebrating the joy of learning, let's help you focus that celebration toward what's really going to be needed. I think somebody with futuristic can come at that with an unbridled awareness of what could be. And futuristic and learner, what they have in common is that I think in many ways a tolerance for ambiguity. Futuristic because they might be imagining what's not there yet, and learner because they know that I can master it as long as I've got some understanding and some education around some things. So it would be a great pair really to say, where do we focus your specialty?
Yeah, and I also think in a person, that would be a great, like I think of a college professor.
Oh yeah.
Right? You think of the wise college professor who consumes but is able to turn that back out from a futuristic. In other words, we're not learning just to learn, but there's a future ahead, a future look. Likewise, someone who has learner and maybe where futuristic is lower could partner, right? That complementary partnership when we think about helping them focus their learning on those things in the future. Very, very important. I mean, I see those two kind of going hand in hand, whether they're in a person or not. Let's talk about the next one because it's special to me.
This is just for you, Jim. Well, I did come up with this, and then I realized my favorite arranger is sitting right here next to me. So I think about arranger more on an everyday management sort of place. So if you've got high learner, it can be really, I think, really important to understand how you're going to stay fresh in your job, or fresh in your relationships, or fresh in your schoolwork. But having that next thing to learn on the horizon can be really important. And sometimes that can feel like a difficult to navigate sort of place. But an arranger could say very tactically, here are some opportunities where we're going to need to know things that we as a collective don't know yet. And I think an arranger could drop a learner in and say, you know what, think about an arranger as a manager, being able to say, I know that you're constantly interested in what's new. You know what, we're going to have some challenges on the horizon, and here's what we need some more study around, some more awareness around. Go forth and learn. And think of the beauty of that partnership together, being able to say, you're not just learning for the sake of learning, but here's how it falls into how we all move forward in an efficient way.
Yeah, and that's actually the essence of our intern program here. Is I don't have learner very high, middle, and I like to learn, but it's very utilitarian. I only learn when I absolutely need to. So I don't love it, but I'll do it when I need to. But I have all these interns and their job is to learn. Many of them have learner, a profile that, or a theme that we see often in our software developers is learner. Analytical is another one of those, but a learner's in there all the time. And so it's great to give them things to do. The arranger wants to have a million things going on. And so I get a million projects going on and say, can you learn enough to get this done for me, right? Because they don't know anything. That's the reason they're here, right? That's the reason we've given them an internship. So I can give them those opportunities and say, learn, and then they come back to me with the results. And that's a great, when I think about how I pair my arranger with the learners that are on my team, and they'll go out. I had one intern put in a ton of extra hours, even though I told him not to. But he said, Jim, I had to know it. I had to know it. And so he couldn't stop himself. And it wasn't a burden, and it wasn't I stayed up so late last night learning. It was, oh, darn, I had to sleep last night.
Which is one of the clues to talent. Yeah, when we talk about what is a real talent, one of those things that comes to the front of your mind is, what can you not help but do?
Right. Yeah, and he couldn't stop. And so it was one of those, I had to figure it out. I had to learn more. I had to bring it back. And of course, that's a perfect, when we think about complementary partnerships, that's a great way to do it. We do see managers with a lot of arranger oftentimes. It's one of those project managers especially have that as well. So a little key just from one manager to another when we think about that. Let your people, give them things that will give them the opportunity to learn. I'm never afraid, Maika, to give one of our students something that I think is impossible. Like I've had some things I don't have the answer. I go in and say, I don't know how to do this, but can you figure it out? And for some of those learners, that's their greatest day ever, when they get an impossible task.
Wow.
Good. I can go learn about this. And off they go. Now you have to give them the time, and you have to have the right framework to be able to do that. But think about how to kind of tickle that or tease that theme out a little bit. And as a manager, giving them those tasks, and they always run right after it, for sure.
I think how you learn is one of the things that we should really cover with a learner, because for some people it is go out and do.
Yeah. What are some other ways as we think about that? What do you think?
Others might be, if I learn best from teaching people, if I learn best from studying it, if I learn best from talking or listening, kind of how you can absorb our information here. Pay attention to how are you absorbing Theme Thursday best. That's going to be a clue to what kind of things feed your learner.
Yeah. Which
probably is colored by a lot of the theme dynamics that you have going on. But one of the really important things to consider with a learner is, what is their best avenue for learning? Because I don't think there's anything prescriptive within the theme about how you learn best. What all learners do have in common is that the process of learning, however they do that individually, is really what they're attracted to.
We ask a question all the time. What's the best recognition you've ever had? You could almost flip that and say, what's the best learning environment you've ever been in? Where have you learned the best? Where have you gotten the most satisfaction with your learning? That might be a question to, again, help work that out and then see that. That might be valuable, because not everybody reads books, right? I think as I'm reading through the chat room, there are those learners who learn only by blocking out time.
Right.
They have to be intentional about it. They have to, especially if your focus is low, but your learner is high, you may have to use a maximizer to block out time, right? To get some of those, to get that done. I think of some people are audio learners, right? They learn best when it's kind of in their head, right? Some are visual learners. They want to see it in an infograph, or they learn by going to a summit or a conference, right? They learn by listening. They learn by seeing. And so there's all these different ways. I think you really got to dig in with learners a little bit and say, where has been the best? Where have you learned best in the past?
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right, likely and unlikely pairs. When we think about what are those out of our database?
So this is fun. When we look at the most likely pair, and learner is, I don't have my stats in front of me, but it's in the top 10 certainly in terms of most common that shows up. Achiever, the most common theme in our database with over 14 million people, is the number one theme that shows up anywhere. It's also the theme that shows up most common with learner.
Right.
So perhaps a little bit of that is self-selection, people who want to learn more about how they can perform better. Perhaps that's the learner achiever piece.
Yeah, we talk about that a little bit with StrengthsFinder, right?
Yeah.
Is that we may have, because this is not a random sampling.
Right.
I think that's one thing, just let me go on a tangent for a second. When we think about our data, a lot of you ask for our data on StrengthsFinder, right? I want to know themes and in order and least common, less likely. We do have to remember this is a self-selected tool, right? People are volunteering into this, not a random sampling. Now, if we did all 7 billion on the planet, I think we'd have a pretty good idea at that point. But I've heard this before. We tend to lean, because achievers and learners, this tool is perfect for them, right?
Of course.
The numbers might be higher because we just might attract some of them to the tool.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. I don't think it surprises me that learner's high, though.
Sure.
You know, when you think about all the people that you know, that openness, that curiosity that humans have about each other.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great to have a 7 billion?
Someday we will. I know it.
That'll
7 billion people having completed it.
That'll be awesome. What about least likely?
So least likely is command to show up with learner. Now I think about how do we compare and contrast command and learner? Command, that influencing theme, is probably more likely to say, hey, this is the way it is. This is how it goes. Where I think learner might say, this is how I've discovered it goes. Or it's sort of that internal locus of control with command versus the external, what can I understand from not within myself, and then bring the understanding from outside of me into me. Mm-hmm. That's what learner is.
Yeah.
Whereas I think command is a little bit more, I know what's inside of me and I can bring that out.
Yeah.
Now you could certainly have them both, and think about how powerful the clarity of teaching might be if you had learner and command, because it would be that constant curiosity, but also filtered by the presence, the confidence, the ability to affect how other people act. But I think it may even soften command in some ways to say, you know what, I don't know it all.
Yeah.
And here's what I do know explicitly.
Yeah. And we think of command too. I think of that as a forward-facing, heavy-moving, heavy execution strategic, or heavy executing and influencing. When we think about those terms, right? It's doing often maybe not even have time to learn, right? Oh, they're moving, they're pushing, it's not like they can't be together. Command is also another one that's very low. Right. In our database from that standpoint. So, but you think that's one where you put those two together, and first of all, a command and learner together could be very, very powerful.
Beautiful. I mean, it'd be incredible.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, about these likely and unlikely, you've got the most likely theme in the entire database with achiever, and the least likely theme in the entire database with command.
Yeah.
So learner in many ways represents 14 million people.
Yeah. No, for sure. Some additional thoughts before we kind of dig into the theme dynamics.
I think your challenge, if you're coaching somebody with learner, is always to help them hone the best way that their curiosity could help other people stay fresh. So think about what is the best way to plant your understanding of learning into a team, into an organization, into a relationship? How can you help other people remain on that cutting edge? Mm-hmm. That might mean admitting that other people aren't as curious about the world as you are, and thinking about ways that you can take what you've learned and help other people benefit from it, finding the best avenues to bring something up. Finding the best times in a brainstorming session to be able to share what you've learned. Mm-hmm. That also means on the back end, we alluded to this before, but find the best way that you learn and really explore that and think about, how do I make space to do more of that on purpose? Mm-hmm. So I think this is one that's almost basic to add to think about theme dynamics, because you can just add the word curious or studious in front of any other theme, and it sounds pretty accurately like learner. So do you learn best about other people if it's relator? Or do you learn best about history if it's context? Or do you learn best if you shut down everything and you only look at one thing if it's focus? Use those other themes instantly to say, how is your best avenue to feed that learner? And then think about doing that on purpose. I think also about what can or will be new in your life. because learners always have to, I think, anticipate and thrive when they can anticipate things they're going to learn. Perhaps something that might be a little bit daunting for learners is reaching the top of any sort of place, and then needing to think, gosh, do I have to jump to a completely different mountain in order to keep learning? And at Gallup, we would say, no, let's figure out creating the very best world class of where you are. So being able to reach out and get some feedback from people saying, what am I doing right now? And how can I learn something that's going to help me get better? So in a job role, that might be constantly looking for what are your customers going to need in the future that they don't have today? And how can you offer to be the advisor around that? How can you offer to go out and acquire new knowledge?
Yeah.
And always know that that's going to be something that's coming.
Yeah, it's great in the context of where if your learning is high and your influencing is low, where you can be just a great support to that influencer in the group, right? You can be that person who really brings the knowledge, the value. That can be tough. That can sometimes look like it's a little know-it-all, or someone who really comes at it, especially a learner maximizer who comes at it from, I'm learning the right things and these are the right ways to do things, can be pretty tough. But it also can be you learners in there. It can also be very valuable to those out in leadership, or those in a group situation where new information is important to what we're doing here, and not everybody wants to stay up with it. And so it's very valuable.
Maybe that's a balcony and basement, where basement is know-it-all and balcony is ask-it-all.
Oh, that's a great, just right on.
Coming at it from a curiosity place. Another thing I think about when I think about learners that we might overlook the utility of, the value of, is thinking about how you can guide other people through change. So because you've got this open-mindedness, this absorption ability, you can be perhaps the first adopters of change. So think about how can you bring other people along because you're comfortable with that sort of discomfort. When we learn something, we have to push ourselves past those boundaries. Learners are more used to doing that, perhaps, than other people. So how can you be somebody who guides others through times of change?
Yeah, especially like in an enterprise or in a work situation for a company that's going through transition. And you're going to have to, your work group is going to have to learn new things. You can be a real leader in guiding that and helping people. It's one, I have an intern this year who's very aggressive in his learning. And early on, I put a contest out there, and he went very aggressively in the contest and didn't share that information with others. Very competition, very winning focus. And that's okay. I mean, that can be worked with, but people have an opportunity to turn that, and I challenged him on it in a conversation to say, turn that to the good of others. How do you take that now that you know that? How do you share that? And maybe that's the way, Maika, when we think about learners, how that those avenues of communication that they use to help get that. How do you get that out? How do you get it out of you? And whether it's pairing it with a communication theme that you might have, an achiever where you might make lists of things that have to be done. I think that's an important question you learners need to ask yourself is, how am I getting this learning out? It's great to bring it in, but the real power isn't when it comes out, right?
Yeah, and I think realizing that it's going to come out in ways that add value, that you are probably more comfortable with sort of cutting edge newness, more relevant, immediate answers than other people may even be aware of. So I think about learner in a leadership aspect being the ability to say, we're all really mastering something that might be a little bit old. Learner, almost like futuristic, can be really comfortable with what do we need to master next? How do we need to be ahead of where our clients or our customers want us to be?
Yeah.
What are we constantly paying attention to that perhaps hasn't even been taught yet? Is there something else out there that we can get our hands on and stay above?
Yeah, new technologies, new ideas.
Sure. From
that standpoint, I think some ways. And understanding there are different ways to teach that or to get that as well. The written word, the spoken word, podcasting, webcasting like we do. I mean, those are all great ways for learners to express that.
So there was I had a great learner moment at the summit this week. I was talking to a friend who had been to several breakouts, and she says, this is great. My learner's on fire. I'm picking up so much I didn't have before. And I said, well, I feel like there's a but coming. And she said, you're right, there is a but. She says, I feel like I've absorbed everything I can absorb and my sponge is just saturated. Mm-hmm. She's talking about her brain, about that ability to sort of soak up things. And it was incredibly overwhelming because as a learner, she felt responsible for doing something with all these new ideas. So I think that sponge maintenance is something learners need to pay attention to.
Yeah,
how are you wringing it out?
Yeah.
How are you sorting it out for yourself and deciding what I'm going to go deeper on, deciding what I need to master, deciding what I need to maybe take some more information in, but giving yourself that time and that space, or maybe that partnership or that however else you work best. How do you maintain your sponge?
Yeah. And maybe the higher, the more intense it is in your top 5, the bigger your sponge is. Yeah. Right. But perhaps at some point you can reach that max and then you got to go. And that's an interesting idea. I mean, that's given me a really good visualization. How do you wring that out? That would almost be a great discussion all on its own. It's how do learners recharge? And that's probably determined by the rest of the themes around them. Mm-hmm. But how do they get that out and then recharge to be able to take in more? Because they will. Right, they will, and they want to, and those are the best days. Any other thoughts, kind of before we dive into theme dynamics?
Yeah, I think one more piece to think about. We talked about how you learn being really important. I would challenge learners, especially if they're in some sort of a leadership aspect, to put voice to why they learn. And I think that is where you can bring in your values and, how our strengths land in the rest of the world affects a lot of things, but depends on a lot of things. Perhaps it depends on how mature they are. It depends on the relationships that we have. I think it also depends on our values. And if you are learning from a place of value, of what you believe to be true and right, and maybe even your mission, that personal statement of this is why I learn, that's something I'd encourage every learner to think about for themselves, and then think about how can you tell others about that, so that when you're raising your hand or bringing up change or being curious or investing in conferences or going away and making sure that you're learning more, that others can help support you and they know why.
That may be a great exercise when we think of raw versus mature is the why. Why am I learning and how am I taking it from the me to the we? And understanding that motivation of why.
Yeah.
I think the folks in our chat room, a lot of these guys are pretty self-aware out there. I think they have some pretty good indications, but I'm not sure everybody does. And I think maybe as a coach, that's a great opportunity in those sessions to ask that question. I mean, coaches should always have a toolbox of great questions. And I think one of those questions for a learner is, why do you learn?
Yeah.
What is it? And dig deep into that and have some insights into the value of that.
It might help with that danger of just learning everything, that rampant piece. I think if you've got a great understanding of here's what I want to accomplish, here's the value I want to be in the world, that might help you sort to the best pieces that you do want to learn.
Yeah, no, right on. Some good stuff there. We're going to dig a little bit into theme dynamics, Maika. A little more complicated for me to set it up today. So if you would, as I'm setting it up, if you would tell folks a little bit about what it is.
So the concept of theme dynamics is how one theme interacts or interplays with another theme. And Jim alluded to this when he talked about learner with context is going to be different than learner with maybe competition. Really what we look at with theme dynamics is being able to embrace the power of how one theme is going to change another. What we did this week, that we do every week, is on our Call to Coast Facebook page, which is facebook.com/groups/called to coach.
Yes.
I've never done that. That's usually something
nice
Jim
job.
does. Thanks. I was a little wringing out of the
There's
sponge.
a learning moment there. Yeah, right on.
On that Facebook page, if you're a member of that group, you can vote on the themes that you'd most like to see blended with learner. And then what we're doing is we're making use of a fantastic tool for coaches or for strengths enthusiasts everywhere. It's the ebook Expanding Your Strengths by Kurt Liesfeld. When you purchase this book, you get to use an app that will guide you through all 520 some different pairs between these 34 themes. So you can use a drop-down menu at the top left-hand side of the screen and put together any two themes. And then what you're going to see are some words that helps us think about what might these themes look like together. So the first two we have up here are themes that I see show up together very, very often. In fact, I was surprised it wasn't the most common, because I thought for sure it would be this one. It's input. So I even have to ask people all the time, what is the difference? Because I like to see how people describe it. Input is a strategic thinking theme. It's all about craving to know more. It's about collecting, perhaps archiving different information. Now, input sometimes does this for the sake of perhaps someday this will be useful, but doesn't necessarily put up barriers to will this or be useful or will it not. It's give me more information. I want to take it in. Learner by itself is about how do I enjoy the process of learning. So for many people with both, the input feeds the learner.
Mm-hmm.
I know I want to learn something, and if I have input, my first step might be to go out and gather information. But you could have learner without input, which would look maybe like I want to go out and teach it, or I need a contest, or I want to just say something out loud, or I want to spend some time with another person in more of an apprenticeship. When you've got learner and input, it's that I enjoy the process and I like all the stuff that goes with the process.
The stuff.
I think
that's when you boil it down, I think it separates, because we're going to look at intellection here in a second. And these are these triplets. By the way, I started a whole conversation around triplets. No, we don't have any books. We don't have any material on triplets.
We also
out
don't
there.
Have triplets.
Yeah, no, we don't. We don't. Simon is enough, right?
Just one baby.
Simon is enough. But the next one that we look at in election is another one, not a surprise. By the way, I see a pattern with the group on Facebook that we stay in the domains often, right?
We do.
The questions.
When I started, I try to pick stuff across all the domains.
I know. And
they vote. It's all up to the masses.
Your vote.
They bring up some of those domains.
Your vote matters. But another one here, when we think of another strategic thinking theme, let's talk about learner in election.
So intellection by itself is folks who just love the thought process. Thinking about putting intellection together with learning, I think the thought process has more of an end goal. So it's the thought process and the thinking and the learning process. Or if you listen to Kurt's words, you're a student of the world in which you live, and you're a student of the world of thoughts that lives within you. So intellection is the process of gaining greater clarity with great reflection.
Mm-hmm.
When you pair that with learner, it deepens what you're learning, because you're learning from 360 different angles, 360 degrees. So I think it's a lot more focused attention to the other possibilities of what you're learning. Intellection might stretch it a little bit deeper or pull it in different directions. What both of these themes want is greater awareness.
Yeah. One I'm excited about in adaptability. I always get excited when we think about that, but we'll get outside of the strategic thinking theme as we get into adaptability. What about those two?
So we're going to go now into the relationship building theme. Adaptability is all about giving people what they need in the moment that they need it, regardless of what the previous plan might have been. So people exceptionally talented in adaptability prefer to be now. It's that urgency. When you think about adding that with learner, it sounds like this. You're open to absorbing new information and to experiencing new situations. You find the old and unchanging boring. What I think adaptability does to any theme is it adds a sense of urgency to it. It probably shortens the timeline that you need in order for that other theme to play out. But if you think about adaptability as a relationship building theme, we talked about learner being able to be a change guide or and help people through it.
Mm-hmm.
That learner could bounce off of how are things happening for people, and how do I bring a newness of thinking or a newness of understanding to that urgency of response. So it's about being present with people, but also being credible, not getting lost at what do the people tell me they need, but being able to respond to those people with something I can help them learn.
Right. And maybe not even getting frustrated in the sense when things change in a dynamic situation where I may be learning about A, and now I need to learn about B, and I can let A go.
And isn't that great?
And move on to B very, very quickly. And so the learning is still there, right? I'm still constantly learning, but I'm able to shift in between those learning environments very quickly. In technology, this is super important because we don't stay on anything very long. I mean, you mentioned Pokemon Go.
and now it's over.
It's already over, which is crazy. I know we saw I looked at the numbers in a report and it spiked and it came back down. But we are moving. That's a good example of we are moving so fast now. The advantage goes in technology to a learner adaptability combo because, hey, it's Python this year, but it might be C# next year. And it might be, we're back to Java the year after that. And so I see the software developers that I work with all the time, those who have an advantage are those who can move between them and not get frustrated.
Right.
I think this adaptability theme is one of those that allows them to do it. Let's talk about learner and deliberative. Now we're in the executing theme.
So cool to go from adaptability to deliberative and see how theme dynamics work here for learner. Deliberative is an executing theme. It's about cautiousness, about being sort of risk averse, whereas adaptability, to contrast that one, is risk okay. Think about being comfortable with potential risk. This executing theme of deliberative is all about taking serious care in the decision you make, anticipating obstacles, and then following the best path of least resistance based on potential obstacles. When you put that together with learner, I think about it as taking great care in what you learn and perhaps also in how you learn. So you can listen to Kurt's words here. You're open to new information and experiences, but you want adequate time to study them carefully and thoroughly. Interestingly enough, to follow your technology example, I think having a learner in adaptability partnered with a learner in deliberative could be perhaps the most dynamic duo say, it's Python this year, but don't jump too fast. Don't get swayed necessarily by the audience.
Right.
Let's think about what's going to be best for the back end at the same time.
Yeah, and thinking about, I think, it's a great example of that. There's a huge cost in being highly adaptable, right?
Yeah.
Because you're constantly repurchasing or you're rebuying or you're right. I mean, in technology, all that stuff comes at some kind of expense. And so the deliberative in this case is a cost control measure.
Oh, what a cool way to say it.
And saying, hey, have we really thought through, are we changing for change's sake? Maybe that's the basement when we think about sometimes at a highly adaptable people in the basements, they're changing all the time just to change. And so deliberative comes along and says, hey, wait a minute, let's think about this a little bit before we make that change. It doesn't make cost sense.
And learner might say, let's think about how we can understand this better.
Right on. We are going to cover Maximizer next week. Let's talk a little bit about that first and then slam these two together.
Maximizer is an influencing theme. It's people talented in Maximizer think about how do we take something that's already good and make it great. So it's about focusing in on potential and polishing that potential. They really like to transform things that already have something strong into something that's better than we ever thought it could be. If you think about putting that together with learner, I think it sounds like this. You are naturally curious and you love to study, but conscious of return on investment, you tend to be selective about what you study. Maximizer is about being selective, I think, more than anything. It's about sort of being choosy and really wanting to spend your time with the areas of greatest potential. So if you put these together, it's similar to where deliberative and learner would say, let's take our time and figure out what we can learn. Maximizer and learner might say, I've already learned a little bit about this. I bet I could learn a lot about this.
Yeah. And that plays a little bit into what I just said about cost controlling measures that may have a maximizer feel to it with the deliberative. If we think about those, again, not exact science, right? Everybody needs to work in discovering and how this works for them. But interesting from that standpoint of even a quality check on what I'm learning. What's the best learning that's available to me?
Yeah.
What methods are best for people? I think of it in a coaching scenario, someone who is coaching someone, these two things can be powerful when you're asking questions about the motivations of learning in others.
I think what learner brings to Maximizer is it opens up some of that sortingness and that discernment. Sometimes we talk about Maximizer being closed. It's not about letting everything in. It's about letting in what's going to be the very best. But learner perhaps could stretch that and say, I see some potential that we could focus in and make it excellent.
Yeah. No, right on. On the back page of the companion guide, of course, we highlight these. There's some statements there, some my motivations. I love to look at these, and I kind of look at each box as we do this to kind of pick out what's the best out of this. And my motivations, I think, is the best on learners. So, and I love these statements, and I hate these statements. Right? This is the. By the way, we have used I hate statements to really get to the heart of motivation. Right? Mm-hmm. And so some people have quizzed me, especially my interns, like they're so used to the positiveness, right, at which we go about strengths and themes, and when we talk about it, and then you use this word hate. It's a great tool to get to the motivations, because when you say I like something, oftentimes, well, does that really sort, right? And this is my maximizer speaking now.
Yeah.
I hate sorts,
yeah.
Right? You can get to the core of motivations that way.
I think that is huge. And I oftentimes think people in general see strengths as only being here's what's good about it. And then they struggle when they see a full profile and they see something that they think they like and it's not in their top 5. Well, do you like it, or does time disappear when you do it?
Yeah.
Is this something you enjoy, or do you wake up in the middle of the night behaving that way?
Right.
When we talk about talent, we do ourselves a disservice to talk about what we like.
Right.
We have to talk about what we love. Mm-hmm. We also have to be vulnerable enough to talk about what we hate.
Yeah.
And then we can learn how to treat each other in not just a good way, but the very best way. And that's how you get to performance. Yep. So it's okay to say we hate.
Right. And so we say we love and we say we hate. So let's talk about these real quick. I love to live on the cutting edge. These are learner statements.
Learner loves, right? Yeah.
I love to live on the cutting edge. I love the learning journey. Mm. Right. And a journey, living on the cutting edge and the journey of it. One is the destination. The other is getting there.
Yeah.
Right. When we think about it. So some people are process oriented and some people live in the moment from that standpoint. So I hate some sorting statements. I hate knowing it all and know-it-alls.
And I think learner hates knowing it all and hates know-it-alls because they don't see it as possible.
Yeah.
You can never know it all if you're a learner.
JB in the chat room said his goal is to be omnipotent, right? From that standpoint. That got a great statement. That's a pretty lofty.
At least it's a goal.
Kind of a lofty goal from that standpoint. And so it's a good way of looking at it, though. A learner, that might be a burden for some learners, right? When we think about the basement side of things, of that might be a burden to someone. Yet in a healthy, very positive standpoint, that also might be a driver.
I think it's a self-awareness piece for learners, understanding that there's always going to be more that you don't know.
Yeah. And if you ask this question, if they can answer a yes to this, I hate repetition and stagnation, that might be a learner, right? That's a kind of a clue to someone.
You might be a learner.
You might be a learner from that standpoint. So, well, Maika, I think we made it through.
We did it. I hope we did a service to all these learners.
Yeah, no, right on. We went the normal amount of time. And if you were listening to the audio version of this, you had no idea what this looked like from a video version.
It was cool. Man, we looked good. If you're only on audio, you should know.
It was kind of fun. A little feedback from you guys in the chat room as I'm closing things up. Good or bad, it doesn't matter. It's not like we can come back to this all the time, Maika, and do it this way, because you're almost never on the campus, and I always am. So it's
sadly do not live here.
We can't do it all the time, but a little bit of feedback from you guys. It's kind of fun to, energy in person is important, right? And so certainly we're able to do that virtually, but it's so much more fun to do it in real life.
In real life, yeah.
In real life, but
is this
you're
real
a
life?
real person. You're a real person. That is great. Any other final thoughts on learner?
Yeah, sometimes for those of us without learner, we see learning as something that takes energy. If learning gives you energy, it's a talent. Leonardo da Vinci said, learning never exhausts the mind.
Yeah, you think he was a learner?
Think about that. It never exhausts the mind. Yeah. That's talent, if it gives you energy.
Yeah, and Da Vinci was a learner when learning wasn't popular. And so a great example, if we look at his life, a great example, I think, I hate to do this. I hate to strength spot famous people, but I think a great example.
I think if we can imagine it, it's okay.
A learner there. Well, remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com. Send us your questions, comments. If you'd like to be a guest blogger, I'm standing next to the person who owns the blogging platform right here.
Send them in.
You can send those blogs in to us. We like to see them, some stuff written on that. Or if you got some ideas, some well thought out concepts on that, send to coaching@gallup.com. But guest blogger in the header line, in the subject line, so that makes it over to Maika. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program as well as past ones, and including all the links to our Facebook group, our YouTube page, iTunes and RSS feeds, iPhone and Android apps as well. Actually, we have some new apps coming. We just announced at the summit. I know we wouldn't say that much about the summit, but we got some great stuff coming here in the future. All available on our coaches blog. And I bet, Maika, in the future, a lot of those things we're doing are going to be we're going to talk about it maybe on the coaches blog. So there's some things coming up. Certainly you want to keep track of what's going on in the CliftonStrengths community. We energized 750 people this last week to go out and change the world, and they're gonna.
They are.
I'm super excited about that. And again, it was great to see many of you out there at the CliftonStrengths Summit. And again, if you're listening to this a year from now, you don't really care, but we do appreciate those that came out. Speaking of the summit, if you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, you can get a list of all of our course offerings at courses.gallup.com. If you have questions about becoming certified, send us an email, certification@gallup.com. And if you're interested in unlocking all 34, why wouldn't you? But if you do, we always recommend you get a coach.
Grab a coach. Don't go alone.
It's a big process. You get all 34. Everybody goes to the bottom. We just do that for some reason. We just want to go to the bottom, and that's okay. But it's good to have a coach kind of along for the journey on that point. And if you're a coach, you should probably still have a coach.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
You should probably still have a coach. It never hurts. But that's available on the Gallup Strengths Center. Just go to gallupstrengthscenter.com. If you found this helpful, please share it. We'd love you to share this around. And this week, many stories I heard from many of you, how you'd shared it with classrooms or with your friends, or you're getting meetups together, and you're going over Theme Thursday with the companion guide.
Or you're sending it to people before you coach them about their themes.
Yeah, that was a great
That
tool.
didn't even occur to me.
Yeah.
But do it. It works. It's not just professional development for you. It could be something that you give to others.
No, right on. Put it together in a YouTube playlist and then share that playlist with them. They would give them almost 5 hours of training before you even meet with them. And so it's a great way to share it. So we ask you that you share it, and I think we were successful, Maika. And with that, if I can find my mouse, because I want to end it right, we'll say goodbye, everybody.